The house was gray and gloomy. Even the surrounding trees couldn't offer respite from the monochromatic scenery as the sun struggled to peek through the cloudy sky. I sighed. Being relocated all the way across the country by the job I hated to a cottage in the middle of nowhere was a frustrating experience. But I couldn't really voice my concerns. My wife, Kira, was already averse to the idea of moving. Both of us knew, however, that we couldn't afford a house in the city. It was this or no job at all. Luckily, I had some time to get my thoughts together before Kira arrived tonight with the moving truck. Sighing again, I exited my car and proceeded toward my new home. A sudden gust of wind blew my hair into my eyes. My vision hindered, and the rustling leaves of the surrounding forest brought goosebumps to the surface of my skin. I hurriedly pushed my hair away to look around. It was just me, the house, the trees, and the clouds. Is this the sound I would be living with in the future? Silence. I rolled my eyes. Was I actually worrying about the sounds right now? Hell, I had a lot more on my plate. Anyway, once Kira arrived, the whole situation would feel a bit more positive. Comforting myself as one does, I reached the door and pulled it open. A loud, jarring, and strangely familiar creaking emanated from it. I held on to the doorknob and moved the door back and forth a couple of times to ease it, but to no avail. The stubborn creaking magnified itself in the empty house till I dropped the knob like it was boiling hot. One footstep in, and the welcoming floorboard creaked under my shoe as well. Ignoring my protesting ears and preparing myself for one last creak, I pulled the door closed behind me. It was pitch black. Where the hell were the windows? I reached back with my arm feeling for the doorknob until I lost my balance and landed on my side. My imagination told me a cloud of dust had just lifted from the floor. For a second, I didn't move. I took a deep breath, raised myself calmly, felt in the general direction of the door, and pulled it open again. I ran back to my car and retrieved the small bottle of oil from the glove compartment. And carefully, using my phone as a flashlight, I poured a couple of drops of oil on the hinges. I moved the door and it was dead silent this time. Once again, I passed through the door, not risking closing it again. Even with the door open, it was still complete dark, except for a tiny circle of light being thrown into the floor graciously by the world outside. Using my cell phone as a guide again, I began to go around to the walls trying to find the light switch, just a few steps to the left of the front door. My fingers lurked on the switch before finally turning it on. In the short moment between light and darkness, my heart skipped a beat, preparing for the worst, but to my utter surprise, my fears were baseless. The lighting was yellow and dim, casting a melancholy touch on the entire place, but other than that, it looked just like a regular home. No windows, but a regular home. A brown, slightly scruffy couch in the middle of the living room, facing a TV with a small coffee table in the middle. Behind the sitting room was the modest kitchen, with black cabinets and a white counter. Nothing out of the ordinary. With a renewed sense of hope, I opened the windows and began to heave bags of groceries from my car's trunk to the kitchen. The sun was setting fast, and the tiny sliver of moon could not penetrate the velvety darkness settling in. The thick forest all around my new home was a solid, dark blob dancing mystically in tune with the wind. Soon, all my bags were transported safely, and I was compelled to stay indoors. But I had just placed myself on the couch to rest, when I heard someone calling my name over the howling wind and swishing leaves. "Kira?" I said out loud. Maybe she was here early. I left the couch and headed for the front door. I heard the voice again. And it did sound like Kira, but it seemed to be coming from the back of the house. I turned toward the back door next to the kitchen. The wind outside was insane. And as soon as I stepped out, my body swayed to the side with the force of the breeze. Planting my feet into the ground, I looked around. There was only about 3 feet of open grass before the undergrowth started, winding its way up on the fully grown trees. "Kira?" I called uncertainly. She was nowhere to be found. But I heard her voice again. Maybe it was coming from the forest. What the hell was she doing in there? Now fear and confusion gripped at my heart. I ran inside, picked up my cell phone, and Snapchatted Kira. No reply. I ran back outside, knuckles white around the phone, turning on the flashlight yet again, and I shone it all over the surrounding trees. Nothing. And suddenly, something sparkled in the dark. I froze and turned the light slowly toward the spot in question. It was a cat. Its green eyes stared through me like an X-ray. Momentarily, relief flooded my body before I heard Kira's voice again. It was just saying my name over and over again. Nothing else. What the hell was going on? Without another moment's delay, I walked forward into the umbrella of trees. 2 steps in, and the light from the house was extinguished completely. The howling wind seemed to have been muted too. It was just me and my flashlight, but the little circle of light it threw was not enough to penetrate the darkness that was pressing in on my eyes. I stopped, giving my vision a chance to get accustomed to the blackness, but it was no use. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I could hear the blood pulsing through my head. My legs felt like lead blocks as I struggled to step forward. But where would I go? Where should I go? There were no path, no opening, no clearing, only trunks of trees before me. I moved the flashlight around. The hundreds of branches above my head looked like dancing limbs, threatening to clasp me if I made a wrong move. Sweat broke out on my forehead. Suddenly, Kira's voice sounded in my ears again. At this point, I couldn't tell if it was new or a recording playing in my head. Nonetheless, I couldn't wait to think about it. I took myself toward the direction of the sound. Leaves crunched under my feet. For a second, I didn't realize that I was running, sprinting through all the growth with the branches scraping at every part of my body. I was brought to a painful halt when a scream pierced through the forest. The trees reverberated with a high-pitched sound. Heart clenched into a fist. I was brought down to my trembling knees. Horror at the infinite possibilities clouding my mind. "Kira!" I screamed like a madman. The pointed grass and forgotten branches impaled my palms, but went forgotten. The scream still echoing in my mind, I pushed myself into a sitting position. Something flitted past me. I sat up straight, alert of the dangers around me. "Kira. Kira," I whispered stupidly, just doubtfully. I stood up slowly. Everywhere I looked, the scene was identical. I didn't know which direction I had come from and where I was going. I just kept going forward. I would find either Kira or the way out, but both results terrified me to no end. My heart continued to beat out of my chest as I walked. My mouth was dry and my skin was prickling, ready to turn at any movement. And every few minutes, I would feel something walking or crawling or sliding past me. Was it something human? And another scream. My stomach dropped. I quickened my pace. A wetness on my cheeks told me that tears had escaped from my eyes. Kira, I kept repeating under my breath. Silence once again. I paused. The only thing I could hear was my own deep breathing, and I gently held my breath. Leaves crackled near me, and the sound, magnified in the complete silence, sounded like a whip. Before my body could even prepare for a reaction, something emerged from behind the tree opposite me and sprang at me. I jumped back and screamed, dropping my phone in the process. The light went out. Pitch black surrounded me, and the creature that had attacked me had fallen down with a thump. Terror like I'd never known before overwhelmed me, and I kept walking backwards, starkly aware of the creature prowling on the forest floor. My back collided against a tree trunk before I could move more than 3 steps. My feet tangled in the undergrowth. I fell forwards on my face, and a moment later, I felt a large creature crawl onto my hand. I screamed and jumped up. I felt around the forest floor looking for my phone, but I couldn't find it. And helplessness was threatening to take over. I had no idea what to do. There I was, with no source of light, sweat dripping down my back, scratches all over my face and arms, clothes torn. Wife lost, and possibly injured in the middle of a forest with no way out. Keep going. And so I did. I kept walking, feeling my way forwards like a blind person. And suddenly, with no warning, I emerged into a clearing. The thin crescent provided some relief from the darkness of the forest. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. When I finally opened my eyes, Kira had emerged from the other side of the clearing. She looked at me with her big eyes, and I walked briskly toward her. But she disappeared into the trees once again. I ran after her, calling her name with every breath, but she didn't return. My mind was unable to grasp the situation before me. I kept running with a stitch in my side, gasping for breath, with no idea of where I was. The darkness and silence consumed me, and I kept running. Wake up! My eyes rang with a loud and heavy voice, someone lightly slapping my cheeks. I opened my eyes. My blurry vision was unable to make out the face in front of me. I raised my arm to shield my eyes from the harsh sunlight pouring in through the window. As my vision sharpened, I noticed the deep scratches on my arm. The forest, the darkness, the trees, Kira, everything came flooding back like a fast-running film reel. And I sat up with a jolt. I breathed. Kira? What? The person before me asked, startled. It was my sister. She looked exhausted, her hair frizzy, her eyes dark. I didn't even register the fact that it was strange of her to show up here in this new house on our first day. I have to get... She pushed me down. Relax, you have to rest. When you feel better, then you could tell us what happened. Riley, I have to get to her, I said angrily, pushing her back and getting up from the ragged brown couch where I realized they had placed me. Riley stood up too and started following me. What's the emergency? Where are you going? I have to get Kira. She's obviously in trouble, I said, not turning back and continuing my way to the back door. Kira? Riley asked. confusion in her voice. I stopped. I turned back to look at her. "Kira, my wife," I screamed, exasperated at how slow she was being. Riley looked at me like I had two heads. "Lucas," she said, her voice so soft I could barely hear her. Something in her voice made me stay still. "Lucas, your wife is dead." My heart stopped. Something happened to her last night. I couldn't help her. "Where is she?" I asked, the calm in her voice scaring me. "I have to see her." Riley's eyes were wide. "Lucas, Kira died 6 months ago," she said, her eyes spilling over with tears. "What the hell are you talking about, Riley?" I screamed. I backed away from her slowly. She had gone crazy. I had to call someone. She ran towards me and grabbed me, hindering my backward progress. "What's wrong with you, Lucas? She died 6 months ago. All of us were at the funeral." I slapped her hands away. "Get the hell away from me. I need to get back into the woods," I said, not wanting to waste my time. "Lucas!" Riley screamed, crying in earnest now. I felt her grab my arms, and I resisted. "Lucas, come back! Kira's dead!" she screamed, a sob escaping her after every single word. "Let me go, Riley!" Riley suddenly screamed, "Doctor! Doctor!" I reacted by my resistance slackening in shock. A bald, middle-aged man ran towards me. And suddenly, for a fraction of a second, everything became clear to me. Kira had died 6 months ago. This was my doctor. This had been my home for the last 6 months. But it passed as quickly as it had come. I continued to struggle against the arms of Riley and the bald man. I only stopped when an injection was stabbed into my arm. Everything was black, and everything was peaceful. Kira was only in my dreams.
Amusement parks are fun for all ages. Kids love them, teens love them, adults love them. Hell, everybody does. I live in a very boring place, in a small town located in a state that everybody forgets about, Iowa. There's not really much to do here unless you enjoy being near animals or doing dumb shit near fields. However, one of the good things my town does have is a very cool amusement park. The park is nationally known, so it tends to be rather busy. I have been to this amusement park many times. I went there a whole bunch of times with my parents and even a few times with my friends during high school. To be honest, I had been there so much, I started to get a little fed up with the place, and by the time I was 17, I stopped going. I had better things to do, like going to house parties with my friends and going to the then newly opened local mall, amongst other things. By the time I was 18, I moved out of town to a much better and exciting place in another state. The reason why I moved was to go to Augsburg University in Minneapolis. Everybody was rooting for me. Unfortunately, I screwed things up, big time. You can say I enjoyed my university experience a lot, but I forgot about the main process, which is studying. Being a small-town girl who's experiencing the big city for the first time, I think I got carried away. I got lost somewhere between all the parties, freedom, guys, and other things, and my academic life was severely affected. By the time I finished my sophomore year, I had to leave the university and go back to my hometown in Iowa. Moving back was a nightmare. My parents were pissed because they had wasted so much money on my education and living expenses for the last 2 years. Luckily, we didn't owe any money to the university or anyone else. But I was completely broke, and my parents weren't going to pay for me to go to any other university or college again. Looking for a job was another nightmare. Most of the people I used to be friends with during high school had moved to other areas to work or study. However, there were still a lot of people I knew and disliked who still lived there. I knew these people were frequent customers or workers at all the places I was hoping to find a job. I was starting to get desperate. A month and a half passed and I was still at home doing nothing, and I was being pressured by my parents, who were increasingly getting angrier by the day. Then one day, I heard my little sister's boyfriend say they were looking for workers at the amusement park. At first, I was a little bit hesitant about the idea of going there because I thought the place would be full of people I knew, but then I learned something great. Apparently, the amusement park had been temporarily closed for over a year, and it was still not open to the public because they were remodeling. They were looking for people to work as their construction workers, guards, and cleaners. My sister's boyfriend had actually applied for the job and gotten it, but eventually got a better offer at an office job somewhere else, so he ended up not taking it. When he told me about it, I thought the job would be perfect for me. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but they paid a good amount of money in comparison to other places. And since it wasn't open to the public, I didn't have to deal with anybody. The next day, I emailed the people from the amusement park, and on the same day I received a response, asking me to go to an interview as soon as possible. I was free that day, so I told them I could go. I got ready rather quickly. I tried to look my best, and then I drove to the place. When I got there, I was very impressed. The place looked so different. The outside of the place was covered. The only visible things were the main entry gates and the tall rides poking through some trees. I went up to the main entry gate where I was greeted by a security guard. He was an old man who acted very nice at first, but after I told him I was there for a job interview, his attitude changed. I didn't know why at the time, but he gave me a sorrowful look. A couple of minutes later, a man came to see me. He was in his early 30s and his name was Brian. He said he was the manager and told me to walk with him to the offices. As we walked to the office, we had to pass through a few rides. I was very curious to see the park like this. I had never seen it so empty. It sort of had this post-apocalyptic look to it. Some of the rides were covered, others were being worked on, and some just looked fine. When we got to the office, Brian asked me a few questions, but they were rather personal instead of professional. It was sort of a personality test, let's say. Something that I got from the interview was that they were looking for someone who was independent, not too outgoing, and mentally strong. Many of the questions were about how good I was at being professional and at keeping secrets. In all honesty, I thought it was normal since I had previously taken cheesy tests like this online. After the questionnaire, Brian mentioned how the people working in the morning were mainly the construction workers, fixing the rides, and some of the painters. The regular staff that worked cleaning and security worked in the evening and night hours. He told me he wanted to hire me as a cleaner. The shift I would have to cover would be from 4 to 10 p.m. The pay was very good, as I mentioned before. They paid more than your average minimum wage, and a little extra if you worked in the evening night shift. I expressed my interest in taking the job, and I even asked about working extra hours if needed, but when I mentioned this, he seemed to dodge the question. The next week I started going to work, and I was pretty excited about it. I was thinking about the shallow sides of things, like the place not being in use so no one will see if I'm actually cleaning. When I arrived, the old man at the gate said hi to me and opened the door. He started asking me a lot of questions, which seemed rather strange to me. He asked why I chose to work cleaning in a place like this, rather than doing something else. It was kind of out of line, but I didn't think he was being disrespectful. There was something about him that seemed genuinely concerned. He also said something weird. He told me not to stay longer than I should at night. When I asked him why, oddly, he took a very long time in answering. Then he just mentioned it's because hitting the road after a certain time is not that safe. What he said made no sense to me. The road we drive to get here is freaking empty. and not particularly dangerous. But I get it. Old people worry about many things. There were some people around when my shift started, mainly the painters and workers. I headed towards the office where I had the interview the other day, and I met Brian once again. He told me what I had to do for the rest of the week and gave me a tour around the place. The tour lasted about an hour, but because the place is rather large and I had to memorize lots of things, I felt the 1 hour wasn't enough. I wanted to ask many questions, but Brian seemed to be in such a rush. The entire time he was just looking at his phone. In the end, I just got on with my job. Before he left around 6 p.m., he told me if I needed anything, that Herbert, the man at the gate, will be there the entire night, alongside another security guard who patrolled the park after 8 p.m. There were 2 women who also cleaned and had the same schedule as me. He told me if I needed anything, I would have to contact them. So I started working my first day at the park. It was rather boring, but that's okay. I had put some music on as I cleaned and just got on with it. Although I do have to admit, once the night hit, the place was very creepy looking. Even though there were some other people around, the place was so big that we barely saw each other on our shifts. I was scared, but time passed very quickly, and the next thing I knew, I had finished my first day. I figured if my first day was okay, the rest of the days would be fine as well. A month passed and I didn't have much to complain about. Yes, the place was cold at night, boring and creepy, but if you found a way to keep yourself distracted, it was okay. Although, there were a couple of things I found strange about the place. The other people I had contact with were very bizarre. Herbert, the man at the gate, always seemed to be worried about me. I have no idea why, and Brian was always in a rush. If you caught him after 7 p.m., he would basically ignore you and just go straight to his car. The 2 cleaning ladies, even though I didn't directly speak to them, always seemed strange to me. They didn't speak English very well, and they were always hanging out together speaking in another language. Whenever they saw me, they would just stare at me. It seemed like they even spoke about me, taking advantage that I didn't understand what they were saying. These ladies' sense of fashion was very weird as well. They wore their uniforms, of course, but they also had these huge rosaries around their necks and hands. I knew people could be very religious, but I thought that was excessive, and even more excessive was that they constantly carried a bottle with the face of Jesus printed on it, which I assumed was holy water. You see what I'm talking about? This kind of shit that sticks out. No one does this. No one normal, anyway. Another thing is that when we got close to the end of my shift, I swear I would see things move in the distance, almost like a person running to the roller coaster. It was hard to see, though, as the nights here got pretty dark, and it's a large place, with plastic on a lot of the rides. I always chalked it up to the trick of the eye. Aside from that, the other security guard who walked around the place always seemed to be in such a mood. If I took longer than normal doing my job or even walking, he was technically kicking me out of the place. I don't know what was up with everybody, but it's like they didn't want me to be there after a certain time. It made me feel really bad at times. They were making me feel as if they thought I was going to steal something, which is so dumb. What was I going to steal? A huge roller coaster? One day as I was working, Brian came to see me. It was still early, 5:30 p.m., if I remember correctly. He told me that Herbert was sick and had to go home, so he gave me the keys to open the gate and close it again when it was time for me to go. He told me to be careful with the gate, which wasn't surprising. I get it. But then he told me not to stay longer than I needed. I agreed with him, but I was pissed. What was up with these people, and why didn't they trust me? Unless there was something they had to hide. I was very curious. I wanted to see what it was like to be in a place like this at night, so I had a plan. I was going to be sneaky and stay a little longer at work. I had the keys and nobody would notice if I stayed longer, since Herbert wasn't there. All I had to do was hide from the patrol guard, and that was it. Many people would be hesitant to do what I was going to do, but not me. I'm not the bravest person, but there was no reason to be afraid of anything. I have already been wandering around the amusement park alone in the dark, and nothing had happened, so I was pretty sure I would be okay. As it got late, I avoided being seen by any of the other people that were there, which wasn't difficult since we were in a freaking amusement park. I kind of stayed at the same place for a while. Then, when I knew it was past the time that the cleaning ladies left, I decided to explore. During my first hour, I was very excited. I wandered around taking selfies, and I was ready for the action. Keep in mind, I was convinced I was going to catch people there doing some shady stuff after hours. At midnight, things started to turn a bit weird. For some reason, I started to feel as if I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was my paranoia, but more odd things started happening. I decided to walk around instead of staying in the same location. That's when I heard something behind me. I turned around and I saw a silhouette in the distance, so I ran, thinking it was the patrol guard. I went to a section where I thought I could hide, since it was a section I had been told to avoid, as it was under construction. Strangely enough, less than a minute after I hid, the lights around that area of the park and the roller coaster that was supposed to be under construction started running. I was surprised and creeped out. I could not understand how it was activated. At that moment, I knew I had to walk away from there, but as I decided to turn, I saw something terrible. A young girl was standing behind me, but she was no ordinary girl. She was covered in blood, and she had deep wounds across her throat. She whispered the words, "Help me," and she tried to grab me. I ran away from there as fast as I could, but noticed she was still behind me, moving very slow, but still creeping towards me. Her hands were outstretched, and her mouth was gaping like she was trying to scream. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, were her eyes. They were bulging out of her face. I kept running, and I started to scream for help. Surprisingly, someone got in my way. I screamed in fear, thinking it was the girl, but no, it was the guard who patrolled the park. He started to ask me why I was there, but I couldn't even answer because I was hysterical. He then grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, and he said we needed to get away from there. After a few minutes of the two of us running, we finally got to the gate where Herbert normally was. There, he helped me calm down and called Brian. I asked the man about the girl, but he didn't answer. He simply told me to wait for Brian. When Brian finally arrived, he asked me what I'd seen. After I explained, Brian told me the truth. The reason why the park had been shut down for over a year, and the reason they were working on some of the rides, is because almost 2 years ago, the roller coaster malfunctioned, killing one young girl who was on it. The day it all happened was a quiet day, since it was at the end of the season and not many visited the place. In court, they managed to settle with the parents of the girl for some money, but they also paid witness not to say anything about what happened. However, they were ordered by the judges to do the proper maintenance on the rides and fix the ones that had problems. Unfortunately, not all the problems were solved, because the ghost of this young girl still wanders around at midnight. That's the exact time when she died. The employees who work after midnight all know about this, but the ones who work early shifts don't. Apparently, the ghost is harmless and would only bother you at midnight if you were around the place where she died. I was so terrified by this story, I wanted to quit, but Brian convinced me not to, offering me more money and a better job once the amusement park opened again. I never told my family or anybody else about this. I sometimes think about the girl, but I had never seen her again. I normally avoid working after 12 a.m. Even between Brian and I, and the employees who know about it, it's a forbidden topic. Next week, the park will open to the public again, but close at 10:30 p.m., which is quite clever. I just hope the ghost of this girl never gets upset, and that nobody decides to be curious like me and tries to catch a glimpse of her. Come to think of it, I'm not even sure if the roller coaster is there anymore. It's sad to think that the happiest places on earth have dirty secrets, and that nothing is really as innocent as we think.
Driving down the long, winding road, curving down into the valley of the hills, the trees tower over top of us like giants. The tops were so thick that they were intertwining with one another, blocking the sun enough that Tracy had the headlights on low just to be able to see where she was going. They would release the sunshine once we got down to the valley at the clearing, where hopefully this would end. "We're almost there," Tessa says from the passenger seat. Her voice had a slight tremble to it. Reaching forward, I place a hand on her shoulder for comfort, squeezing it ever so gently. She reaches up with her own hand, laying it on mine, and without thinking, places her other one on Tracy's knee. Myself, and probably my sisters as well, felt a surge of energy shoot through the hand. Closing my eyes, I leaned my head on the headrest, trying to catch a little sleep before we got there. We were all going to need to be at our full strength on this one. Trinity. I hear Tessa calling my name. Blinking my eyes, I realize that I did indeed fall asleep and we were there. Sighing heavily, I watch as Tracy pulls into the narrow gravel driveway leading up to the stone brick house, covered with moss here and there. The chimney stood tall and strong, blowing out white smoke from the fire that obviously burned within. Cocking my head to the side, I quickly looked to the front at the other two. They were as lost as I. There should not be smoke coming from that chimney. No one was to be there. The owner of that house, which was their mother, had been dead for 5 years, and that was the last time that they had been up there. After the incident that year, they could not bring themselves to come back to this place. Not until it was needed. Not until they had no choice. Just as we saw the smoke in the chimney, it was gone. What the hell was going on? Tracy slows the car down to an almost crawl as we got closer, listening to the tires crunch on the gravel as she comes to a stop in front of the house. Turning the car off was almost deafening. Neither of us were speaking, lost in our own thoughts. The birds and animals of the mountains called out in the background, almost as if they were taunting us to get out of the car. Without a word, all three of us opened our doors to get out and stretch. "Wait on the bags," Tracy says. "Let's go see what the hell is going on in that house. You two did see the smoke, right?" "Oh, please tell me I'm not losing my mind. Granted, I would believe it after the drive, but come on!" "No, Tracy, we saw it as well," I said, looking towards the old oak door curved at the top. Tessa nods in agreement. With a last look at one another, we walk towards the front porch, and we walk as one up the 3 steps leading to it. Tracy steps up with her keys to unlock the door. The knob turns easily under her hand. It was not locked. "Have either one of you been here?" Tracy asks. "No," Tessa and I both say at the same time. With a nod from the two of us, she pushes the door open. Walking into the cozy living room, there was a smell of a fire that had just been burning. The room was warmer than it should have been. Tapping the other two on the shoulders, getting their attention, I place my finger to my lips. "Stay silent, someone may be here." Nodding with understanding, they move forward in search of the house. Separating, Tracy goes up to the loft to check as Tessa goes in the direction of the sunroom. Basically the inside greenhouse. I decided to head towards the back where the big country-style kitchen stood. Flipping light switches as we all went, the house started to light up. We needed to drive out the dark in this house. Reaching the big granite island in the middle of the floor, I glide my hand over it as the flashbacks try to come flooding in. Shaking my head clear, I knew better than to let the darkness get a hold of me. Doing a quick run-through with my eyes, I make sure I do not see anyone in there. That is when the blood-curdling scream comes from above. Tracy. I ran at top speed through the house yelling for Tessa. Then I raced up the stairs. Leaping to the last step, I glanced into the loft area to see what had made my sister scream so horribly. Tracy stood in the middle of the floor, white as a ghost. I could see her trembling from where I stood. Hearing Tessa coming up behind me, I raised my hand to her to slow her down. Tracy was not all there right now, and I was scared that my eldest sister was going to crumble. We walked towards her with calming, soft words coming from our mouths, easing her back into her shell from the fright that had her so locked up. Close enough now to her, we place our hands on her shoulders, catching her as she falls. Falling to our knees with her, we hold her, stroking her hair. She slowly raises her hand, pointing out the window. Following to where she was pointing, we gaze out the window. Off in the distance, at the edge of the property where it would not dare cross, stood the withering black mass of what it was we were here to fight. Standing up, I walked to the window and glared down at it with a determined smile on my face. Before I knew what was happening, it was crossing into the yard, heading towards the house. Blinking rapidly, I let out a gasp of fear. This is not possible. It did not have the authority to cross that barrier until tonight when the moon rose. It crossed the barrier. I squeal out to my sisters. Turning from the window, I run towards them, helping Tessa pick Tracy back up to her feet. Time to stop being scared, sis. It's time to haul ass. Running back down the stairs just as fast as I came up them, we take off to the back door. We knew what we had to do to get rid of it once and for all. The main reason why they came back was they had to destroy this darkness so it could not harm anyone else. Hitting the back door at top speed, it flies open as we pile out of the house toward the path that would lead us through the woods to the clearing where the ring of stones lay. Our feet pounded the dirt path, sending up puffs of dirt with each step. My skin felt like it was crawling. The darkness was behind us and getting closer. As we enter into the woods, it was as if the sun was put behind a shade of cloth, for the temperature dropped way down from where it was. Fog seemed to rise from the ground as if it were just oozing to wrap us in it. Coming to a thundering stop within the fog, we all stand there grasping for each other's hands. We could not get lost in this shit and get separated. Not a word was spoken between the three of us. We were listening to see if we could hear it coming. Silence. Nothing but eerie silence was all we could hear. My skin began to grow clammy from the moisture in the air, as well as the sweat that was beginning to pour off me in buckets. Tessa's hand in my left hand felt just as clammy. Hearing a low growl close to a snarl coming from the fog, we knew it had entered the woods with us. We had no choice. We could not stop. We had to get to the damn clearing. Pulling my sister's hand behind me so we did not fall, we start moving forward, going as fast as we could. I tried to keep looking forward to find my way past the big oak tree with the hole in the center of it big enough for a person to stand in, and down further into the valley. We had a good 2 miles before we even reached the damn tree. With each step we took, it was as if we were having a fight to move. The fog was trying to imprison us so that we could not get out of the forest. With a new wave of determination, even through the damn fear, I picked up the pace. This apparently pissed off the darkness, for the wind began to pick up and howl. Before I could tighten down on Tessa's hand, it slipped out of mine. Quickly looking behind to see why she was letting go of my hand, I could see her fading into the fog. Tessa! Tracy! I holler out, moving towards her as I lose sight of her, my words bouncing off the fog back into my face. The urgency to get to the clearing was growing in me. I knew I had to get there, but leave my sisters? I know we made a promise on the way down here that if anything were to happen to the others, the last one standing would finish it. I won't come back for you, I say softly, and turn back the way I was going. With more of a need to survive and fear tugging at my heart, I once again made a move towards the clearing. As it was just me, I did not have to worry about keeping pace with my sisters. I could move like I needed to. Placing my right hand out in front of me, hoping to prevent getting slapped in the face with a branch, I picked up my speed. The darkness was near. I could feel it starting to reach out for me as it did my sisters. Not this one. Without a second thought, I took off at top speed down the path, letting nothing but intuition rule my direction until I finally came out of the fog. The wind blew my hair around my face, tickling my eyes as I tried to find the place to stop and catch my breath for just a minute. Squatting behind a big maple tree, with my chest heaving from breathing hard, I had sweat coursing down my back. Peeking around the tree, I looked to see if the darkness was still following me down the path. Seeing nothing behind me, I start to relax and breathe, trying to calm the racing horse in my chest. Even though the fog had lifted a bit, there was still a dampness to the air, still a stale feeling. Able to finally breathe comfortably enough without my lungs feeling like they are going to implode, I slipped down the side of the hill. It was a shortcut we used to take when we were younger, trying to beat our mama to the clearing. I now know why she showed us this. She knew that we would need it one day. Thanking her silently in my mind, I ducked down closer to the ground. I was here. One last push and I would be there. I just had to make it there, across the big open grassy field. On any other day, the field would be lit up with either the sunshine or moonshine. Right in the middle of the clearing stood a big slate of granite rock, the altar, we called it as kids. With a growl, I take off running at top speed for the altar. The incantation had to be said there, along with what was in the vial around my neck. All three of them had one. Their mother made sure of that before she died. Once the incantation started, I would need to open the vial, pour it on the stone, then slice my hand for the blood to banish this bastard from wherever the hell it came from. The air began to tingle as if it had electricity flowing through it. My hair on my arms started to stand up straight. Keeping my eyes peeled to the woods around the clearing, I can see the darkness starting to seep in around me, closing the forest off from me, trying to make me feel alone. Granted, it was working, but I was not about to let it know that. Sliding to my knees in front of the altar that I had sat at many times in my life, it was time to do one last ritual. Quickly, I snapped the vial off my neck, which held a part of the essence of which was the darkness that surrounded me. Pouring it on the stone, it begins to bubble and hiss. Snatching up a rock off the ground, I closed my eyes tightly, knowing the next part was going to hurt like a bitch. Slicing the sharp rock down my palm of my hand, my blood drips on the blackness, making it billow up with smoke. I call to the four corners. Open now, I summon thee. Embrace this darkness. Take it from me. I chant the incantation 3 more times, and with each round, the puddle grew smaller and smaller. The darkness around me was so close that I could touch it. The darkness around me that was so close I could touch it began to fade. Having nothing left in me to hold myself up any longer, leaning my back up against the altar, watching. I may have gotten rid of it today, but something tells me it will be back.